A record number of unaccompanied minors are now being held in what are being described as jail-like conditions at America's southern border. The flow of migrants unlikely to slow anytime soon. Actually, it's probably going to go up. Is the Biden administration ready to acknowledge we got a full-blown crisis on our hands? Friends, it's time for Hold the Line. Welcome to Hold the Line. I'm Buck Sexton. So we know there's a crisis. The Democrats can play as many games with this as they want. They can try to pretend that we can't actually see what's going on, the photos, the news reports, the numbers. They can hide from this only for so long before it becomes absurd that they're telling us there's not a problem, that this is just what happens when you've got a great presidency like Joe Biden's, where they do all the right things, they make all the right decisions. But unfortunately, we can see that's just not true. So what do you do when you have a problem that keeps growing, that you can't control, and that you're actually the cause of? Well, the obvious move, the Democrat move, the Pelosi move, is blame the guy before you, which is what they've started to do now. That's right. Biden comes into office, changes enforcement priorities at the border, decides that we're going to take a very different approach to illegal immigration overall, and Nancy Pelosi wants you to know the real problem here is, you guessed it, Donald Trump.
Actually, the facts are these. There are more children, about 700 more children, unaccompanied children, coming over the border. This is a humanitarian challenge to all of us. What the administration has inherited is a broken system at the border, and they are working to correct that in the children's interest.
Inherited a broken system. That's right. It's, the administration before is the reason for this, right? But what's so interesting is that, as we know, there was a surge of migrants, illegal immigrants to the border in 2018 and 2019 under Trump, but they got it under control. They took the necessary steps, you see, to stop the flow, and it did. But then all of a sudden, Biden comes in, changes things around, and we have a humanitarian as well as rule of law crisis at our southern border. So they got to come up with different reasons to explain this to the American people that aren't the most obvious one, which is, let me tell you, Joe Biden is president. Illegal immigrants know that Joe Biden, as a Democrat and as somebody controlled by the left, isn't really going to try to deport them. In fact, amnesty is being openly talked about and pushed right now in Congress. The House is trying to move forward on an amnesty bill. It's already happening. So you got to distract people from Biden as the cause of the crisis while the Democrats try to get to their end goal here, which is, of course, amnesty. So what's one way that Pelosi tries to help throw up a smokescreen? You know, it's climate change that's caused this. Play it.
Of course, we have to also look to Central America and Mexico and the rest. The corruption, the violence, all of that so bad. My most recent trip to the Northern Triangle, that would be Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, you saw the impact of the climate change, mind you. These people were leaving because of the drought. They couldn't farm, and they were seeking other ways to survive.
Nancy was so proud of herself that she remembered the Northern Triangle countries. I got to say, that's not a test you'd want to put Joe Biden to anytime soon. But is it the case, then, that anybody from one of those three Central American countries that she mentioned has the right to just come to America? Is being from El Salvador or being from Honduras or being from Guatemala cause for asylum? Just, I'm from this country. Really? Then we better make room for a few million people from Central America. And at the rate we're going, that's actually not that far off, about 100,000 plus a month. In fact, here's CBS on what the numbers look like. As of Sunday morning, U.S. Border Patrol was holding more than 4,200 unaccompanied migrant children in short-term holding facilities, including jail-like stations, unfit to house minors, according to government records reviewed by CBS. So over 4,000 minors being held right now in detention in jail-like facilities. Kind of sounds like kids in cages. Remember we were told all about kids in cages back in the day? Kind of sounds a bit to me like that. And yet here we are being told that it's not a crisis, nothing to worry about. In fact, it's so not a crisis, according to Democrats, that the Biden administration has to send down the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA. You can see this Biden administration sending FEMA to help migrant children in the shelters because it is obviously an enormous crisis. But don't worry, Democrats are still playing the game where they say maybe it's not actually a crisis. We can call it something else. It's a challenge. It's a hurdle that we shall meet. No, no, no. This is what happens when you have an open borders presidency that everyone else can actually see doesn't want to shut down illegal immigration at the border because one political party in America benefits from that illegal immigration. It is, of course, the Democrats. Here is White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki telling everybody, you know, there's something going on at the border.
Does FEMA's arrival at the border mean that the administration feels what is happening down at the border is a disaster?
I know that we always get into the fun of labels around here, but I would say our focus is on solutions, and this is one of the steps that the president felt would help not become a final solution, but help expedite processing, help ensure that people who are coming across the border have access to health and medical care. Clearly, the numbers are enormous.
Let's play the label game. Why won't she just say what it obviously is if labels don't matter? Clearly they do matter because she won't use the applicable label to what's happening at our southern border. And in terms of solutions, it's very important you understand this. They don't want to solve the problem of illegal immigrants coming to America. They want to solve the problem of how quickly and efficiently and comfortably they can process those illegal immigrants so that they are released into the interior of the United States, right? You're not going to just take teenagers, 12-year-olds, and take them into federal custody and then let them free on the street without having any idea of their safety, right? That's just one example. So they have to process them first. They have to go through that whole giving them an asylum court date. You'll also notice not a ton of reporting on the people who are actually coming. You don't see very much about it, do you? You don't see a whole lot of explanations of the people that are supposedly claiming asylum in this country. No one in the press wants to interview them. They could blur out their faces. They could protect their identities. We can't know what's really going on. 100,000 people a month is a lot of people, which is where we are right now. In fact, it's going to be over 100,000 people. Oh, but remember, and here's Representative Veronica Escobar of El Paso, Texas. Why explain anything when you can just blame Trump, which is what they're going to do?
The flow of humanity arriving at our front door never stopped. The Donald Trump administration didn't stop them. And what we are seeing today is the consequence of 4 years of dismantling every system in place to address this with humanity and compassion. This is not something that happened as a result of Joe Biden becoming president. We saw the increases dating back almost a year, and this was during the Trump administration.
No. We're not going to allow this, not going to play this game. The Remain in Mexico policy, which is what the Trump administration did to bring illegal entries into the United States at our southern border way down from where they were, was dismantled day one by the Biden administration. That's just one example. They said, no, let's get rid of that. Let's make sure that we let people into the United States who claim asylum and then hope that, on the honor system they show up. Let's not actually make it so that they have to really qualify for asylum or else they're not going to be able to stay in the United States. That's just one example. It's not true. Also, crossings were way down during the pandemic, so there's that as well. But when Democrats run out of propaganda, when they run out of deflection, they're just going to lie to you. And they're going to lie to you a lot about this border until they get amnesty, and at that point they're going to say, too bad for you. Welcome to a different country where the Democrats are always in control. Heck no, he won't go. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is defiant as an increasing number of high-profile Democrats are calling for his resignation. We've got the latest on the ongoing Cuomo saga when we come back. It'll come as no surprise that I love and respect our nation's protectors, the men and women in the military, our veterans, and first responders. And while there are many great programs out there designed to assist and provide treatment to our warriors in different capacities, one stands out above the rest: Warrior's Heart. Warrior's Heart is dedicated to healing our nation's warriors. They provide the first and only private accredited treatment program in the U.S. for warriors only, military, veterans, and first responders faced with the self-medicating struggles of alcohol addiction, prescription and drug addiction, PTSD, mild traumatic brain injury, along with other recurring issues in a private 40-bed facility on a 543-acre ranch. More so, Warriors are provided with a minimum 42-day peer-to-peer residential treatment program. Warriors Heart gives these warriors the option of day treatment, outpatient, and sober living with a 60-day minimum. To reach their 24-hour hotline, dial 866-950-0636, and your call will be answered by a warrior. Again, to learn more about the treatment center, go to warriorsheart.com/thefirst. That's warriorsheart.com/thefirst.
Do you think Governor Andrew Cuomo should resign?
I think the investigation is underway and we should see what it brings us.
President Biden breaking his silence yesterday on Governor Andrew Cuomo, but to no surprise, he still won't answer reporters' questions on whether or not he thinks Cuomo should resign. This is the New York Times and Washington Post are reporting that Cuomo's vaccine czar, Larry Schwartz, has been calling New York County officials over the past few weeks, gauging their loyalty to the embattled governor. This mob-like outreach prompted one Democratic executive to file an ethics complaint saying the outreach was at best inappropriate, at worst it was clearly over the line. Interesting. A lot of what we see from Governor Cuomo continues to be over, or has been, I should say, has been and will be over the line. Here's what's going on, folks. You had a guy who was elevated to being a national hero during a pandemic because he was useful for Democrats, who at that point wanted to believe that they had the secret sauce, if you will. They knew how to handle the pandemic. They knew what leadership really looked like. And these blue states were going to show the rest of the country how it's done. And Cuomo was supposed to lead the pack with that. The problem is that the numbers in New York were always terrible. That New York was the first part of the country to get hit really badly by COVID-19, New York and New Jersey. And that now, when all said and done, New York and New Jersey have the number 2 and number 1, respectively, worst per capita COVID death rates in the country. So how does a guy like that, I mean, if you're in a classroom, how is the valedictorian the kid that gets Fs? How does that happen? Well, there has to be something else going on there. And in this case, Governor Cuomo could count on the Trump factor, or really the anti-Trump factor. He went from holding these press conferences day in and day out to holding anti-Trump one-man rallies, if you will, and doing so as the great savior during the COVID pandemic. He got an Emmy, he got a 7-figure book deal. He was the man. Everybody loved Cuomo in New York, except for those of us who were paying attention, except for the people who understood that the nursing home debacle, disaster, catastrophe wasn't going to go away, and that he was responsible for it. It was really on him. And it was his order. And then you add to it the cover-up, and you have the grounds for a resignation or an impeachment right then and there. We're talking about thousands of seniors sent into nursing homes with COVID to possibly infect other seniors with COVID at a time when this was the gravest single threat to life and limb in the United States. I mean, this was the big challenge we all faced. You're going to send people with COVID into nursing homes? I mean, if you were trying to create a biological weapon scenario, that would be a pretty good way to do it. Send people who are at high risk with weakened immune systems into an enclosed facility full of other people who are at high risk and have weak immune systems, and who are almost 50% of the deaths nationwide, even though they're a very small percent overall of nursing home residents are a small percent of the actual national population, something like 2 or 3%. So that was and I haven't even talked, you'll notice, about the sexual harassment stuff. And that's on purpose. Why is it that the Democrats are turning on Cuomo when it comes to sexual harassment, but not the same way with the nursing home catastrophe, which does have a federal investigation underway, which is being looked at by the New York State Attorney General Letitia James? Why is one something that the Democrats will rally behind, and the other something that somehow, fog of war, we could all make this decision? I mean, here, for example, is Bill de Blasio, who is a terrible Democrat in his own right, but here's Bill de Blasio saying in no uncertain terms, oh no, Cuomo's got to go.
What we've heard is about the governor and his team trying to link vaccine supply to political support. That is the definition of corruption. It is disgusting. It is dangerous. There are lives on the line, and it cannot be tolerated. There needs to be now a full investigation of that.
Yeah, a tyrant. That's what Cuomo became during all of this. And Bill de Blasio, to his credit, which I can't believe I said that out loud, Bill de Blasio has been saying that Cuomo should resign for days now, if not weeks. He's been saying this quite openly. So who's actually going to go against him? Who's willing to say that Cuomo should resign? Remember, they're pushing for it based on the sexual harassment claims. Bill de Blasio, that just broke today, the story about the pressure about vaccines, but most of the outrage has been about Cuomo's treatment of female employees and his staff. Here's what lawmakers are saying. New York lawmakers calling for action against Governor Cuomo, calling for resignation, 68 Democrats, 20 Republicans, that's 88 total. Calling for impeachment, 12 Democrats, 35 Republicans, that's 47 total. So they'll call for resignation, but they don't want to call for, not the same number, obviously, you want to call for impeachment, because that's on them. That means they have to act. And they know that if they cast those votes, and for some reason, if they aren't very sure what they're doing, and they don't manage to take Cuomo down, and who knows what the kind of horse trading he'll do at the last minute, you don't want this guy, if you're in New York State politics, you don't want this guy putting you on his bad list. They're all afraid of him. They're still afraid of him. And when you hear about somebody who might be willing to use vaccine supply to twist arms for his own partisan political ends, you get a sense of the extremes he's willing to go to in order to stay in power, the abuses that he may be willing to engage in. I mean, he's quite literally playing with lives there in order to shore up his political support. The same way, though, that he was able to shut down businesses and restaurants and on a whim, and we all just were supposed to listen here. This is true in many other states as well. We had so many people advocating for the warm embrace of tyranny because of COVID-19. And it's like many of us are just now starting to wake up from the fog of this illusion and seeing it for what it really was. Nancy Pelosi won't quite say he should resign, but she's saying he should probably think about it.
People have to look inside themselves and say, and Governor Cuomo also, how effective is their leadership in leading the state under the circumstances that are there? But I do think that the women deserve to hear the results of these investigations, as does the governor.
But you're not calling on him to resign right now?
I think we should see the results.
Let's see the results. You know what the results are going to say? The women said this, Cuomo says that. And then you know what Cuomo's going to say? Well, the results are inconclusive. This isn't a trial. There's not some verdict. They're just going to produce a finding. The findings are going to say what we already know. It's a delay tactic. It's so they can try to push other things in the front of the news cycle, try to focus on, Trump or white supremacist terrorists in the military or some other, the QAnon coup that's never actually going to happen. They're buying time with this. And no matter what the investigation says, the Democrats will still find some reason for why he shouldn't go. Always remember, the one thing the Democrats really excel in is the raw and ruthless exercise of power. Speaking of which, violent riots continue in Portland as Mayor Ted Wheeler struggles to shift funds back to police, whom the city just started to defund last year. We got journalist Andy No with us to talk about the latest in just a moment. You never thought COVID-19 could cost you your home, right? Well, it just might. Here's how. Cybercrime is up across the board about 75%, and by far the most serious cybercrime to worry about is home title theft. That's right, cybercriminals, foreign and domestic, are now after our homes, and it's easier than you'd think. The title documents to our homes are online now. The thief finds your home's title and forges your signature on a quitclaim deed stating you sold your home to him. Then he takes out loans on your home and leaves you in debt. You won't know until late payment or eviction notices arrive. Insurance doesn't cover you, and neither do common identity theft programs. That's why I protect my home with Home Title Lock. The instant Home Title Lock detects someone tampering with my home's title, they help shut it down. Go to HometitleLock.com and register your address to see if you're already a victim. Then use code RADIO to receive 30 free days of protection. That's code RADIO at HometitleLock.com. Again, code RADIO at HometitleLock.com to receive 30 free days of protection.
Back up! Don't fight him! Don't fight him! Back up! Don't fight him! What are you doing? Push him in!
Tense moment outside a Chase Bank in Portland, Oregon, as a security guard is forced to draw down on a violent group of anti-police rioters. Plywood and chain link fencing once again becoming a common sight on the streets of several major cities in the Pacific Northwest. Last week, rioters set fire to an occupied federal courthouse in downtown Portland. Thankfully, the flames were extinguished without any injuries. Meanwhile, the city's mayor, Ted Wheeler, is struggling to control not only the riots, but a surge in violent crime across Portland. Wheeler recently announced he would seek $2 million of funding for police and other agencies. The request is an about-face for the city, which last year voted to cut nearly $16 million from the law enforcement budget. So is the city of Portland reaping what it has sown? Joining me now is journalist Andy No. He's the author of Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. Andy, good to see you.
Thank you for having me on.
There's been very little national media coverage, no surprise, of the current riots going on in Portland and Seattle. When did they get going, Andy? What kicked this off?
They've been going since George Floyd died last year. It's just that the media, the national legacy media, only paid attention when they could use it to blame on Trump, as they did in July last year. And as the riots continued on and Trump went out of office and the riots still continue, they don't focus on that anymore. So in Portland now, we've had 4 straight days of protests, most of which have turned to riots. That footage that you showed of the people trying to break inside the Chase Bank, that happened last Thursday. And then the following night, rioters damaged severely the exterior of the federal courthouse. This is the same one that they, for a month last year, day in and day out, try to set on fire to burn it down. And the sad thing is they went to attack this facility as soon as officials removed the protective barriers that were up for more than 8 months. And as of today, the fencing has now gone back up.
Rioters in Portland are continuing to target that federal courthouse, Andy. We see that they tried to set it on fire, from what we understand. What is the significance of this courthouse in downtown Portland? It seems that they keep targeting this.
They target it because they hate America and they don't recognize the rule of law. And so courthouses, police stations, anything that has to do with criminal justice system, they view as targets and as fit to set on fire, to vandalize, and to destroy. This is on top of the routine damage that they do to businesses that have been struggling for almost a year now because of COVID-19 related restrictions and policies. So as I've said before, they're really trying to push cities like Portland and Seattle past the point of return so that recovery is impossible, so that they can move in the power vacuums and create autonomous zones, as they did in Seattle last year, as they did in December in Portland. There's an ongoing autonomous zone right now in Minneapolis.
So just to understand this, because I was going to ask you, terrorists usually have something they want, some list of demands. I mean, there is some pretty nihilistic terrorism out there, but generally they're trying to achieve some kind of goal, ideological or otherwise, political goal. It sounds like you're telling me that Antifa really believes if they make Portland and Seattle quasi-unlivable, lawless hellholes, that the city of Portland, or at least big chunks of it, let's say, could be turned into an autonomous zone? Is that really their plan?
Yeah, it's in these autonomous zones that they organize, they recruit, they radicalize, they get funding. I mean, last year during the Chaz, as I write about in my book, I was there in that autonomous zone in Seattle for a week. It was allowed to go on for more than 3 weeks, and hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations were being poured in, and they were using this to buy riot gear and food and pay for their accommodation and all that. So it's just a breakdown of law and order in every way imaginable, and you're having what some thinkers call anarcho-tyranny. It's like you have the worst tyrannical aspects of a totalitarian state without any pretense of basic law and orders.
Is the government response in Seattle and Portland similar to what we saw last summer when it was earlier on after the George Floyd riots, or have they stepped it up a little bit? I mean, have they learned from some of those earlier mistakes?
Well, they're a bit more quiet now because they can't use it as political fodder against the Trump administration. And I think police, at least what I saw in one of the riots that occurred in Portland a couple of days ago, is that police created a really fast perimeter around this Black Bloc militant group, and it created what is called a cattle them in and stopped them dead in their tracks. I don't know why this tactic wasn't done 6 months ago, 8 months ago, when riots were happening every night. But hopefully it's a good sign. I mean, it was demoralizing to see that rioters could pre-announce their intent for criminal activities weeks in advance and show up, and no law enforcement would be there.
Andy, you understand these groups. You obviously have written your book Unmasked about the ideology, actions, just the details of what Antifa and these radicals are up to. Is there some sense among them that under a Biden administration, this seems a little counterintuitive to the general public, that they would, or are they really, they're so dedicated to this idea of anarchism or whatever it is that it doesn't matter who the president is? I'm just wondering, are there other radicals, are there other leftists who are saying, hey guys, we've got one of ours in the White House now, calm down a little bit, or does that not happen?
It doesn't happen. I think there's a misconception that Antifa are Democrat voters. And I think that misconception comes because mainstream Democrats are reluctant to condemn Antifa. So you would think that they're allied. In the eyes of the Antifa, they don't recognize any American political party, any American government. So the messaging that you see they carry since Biden's come into office is they say, we don't want Biden, we want revenge. So they're trying to, literally in their words, to abolish the United States. And that's a grand goal that, they won't achieve it. But at a much smaller level, you can see they're having a lot of success in destabilizing and making certain urban areas in America unlivable.
Andy, what are your expectations? Is this going to just continue on? Is it going to get worse?
It's going to get worse as the weather gets warmer. They slowed down a little bit with some of the sub-freezing temperatures that happened in December and January. But with the sun out a bit more now in the Pacific Northwest, they're being a bit more emboldened with organizing. I mean, the riots that happened on Saturday, for example, happened in 3 major cities, Portland, Seattle, and Los Angeles, all done by the Youth Liberation Front, an Antifa group who has Twitter account. So, their organizing is being done on these big tech platforms, and these are the same platforms who have promised to clamp down on violent extremism, yet they allow this organizing to be done out in the open.
Andy No, check out his book Unmasked. Andy, stay safe. We need you, buddy. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Tucker Carlson now in the crosshairs of the United States Marines Public Relations Department after he dared to criticize some of the priorities of the Pentagon lately. Has the military gone too far by openly criticizing this Fox News host? Senior columnist for Town Hall and retired Army Colonel Kurt Schlichter joins us next. The United States military is facing some criticism for spending this past weekend responding to Fox News host Tucker Carlson over political correctness. One sergeant major took to Twitter writing, quote, "Women lead our most lethal units with character. They will dominate any future battlefield we're called to fight on. Tucker Carlson's words are divisive, don't reflect our values. We have the most professional, educated, agile, and strongest NCO corps in the world." So when did it become the U.S. military's job or position in any way to publicly voice disagreement with the opinions of a cable news host? And is this woke military leadership under President Biden going to make us vulnerable to actual threats like China down the line? Let's bring in someone who's been following the story closely, retired Army Colonel and Town Hall senior columnist Kurt Schlichter, also a couple of decades in the United States military. Kurt, good to see you.
Good to be here.
So I'm glad you're here because as just a little CIA pleb, I never actually served. I was only in war zones carrying guns, but let's not talk about that because then people always get mad at me and say, that's not service. I say, I agree, I was making lattes. You served in the United States military, actually in uniform. What do you think about when you see official U.S. mil accounts hitting a Fox News host and saying some pretty outrageous stuff.
It's stunning, Buck. It's stunning that they take 240 years of tradition, just toss it out because Tucker said things they don't like, and they wanted to go in and distract from what he really said, which is we have an essentially unserious military that's not ready for high-intensity conventional combat against the Chinese in the Western Pacific, and decided to instead defend something that Tucker Carlson never said in the first place. So there's a lot to unpack here. I think the worst part is that they spoke at all. We have 240 years of tradition, the military staying out of partisan political debates. They threw that out the window. We have regulations that say you can't engage in partisan political debates in uniform on military websites and military forums. They blew that out. I'm old enough to remember when sergeant majors enforced standards, not broke them. And of course, you also have rules against targeting American citizens for information operations, which is what this was. This is an attempt to have an effect on Tucker Carlson or the people watching him, to make people not like Tucker Carlson, not watch Tucker Carlson, not accept his credibility. That is specifically banned. So you have multiple breaches of regulations, a breach of a giant tradition, and that's even before we get to the big picture, which is they don't want people talking about how the military is unable to fight and win against China.
I want to jump in with what Joe Biden mentioned last week as a focus of the military. This is going to transition right into what we're going to talk about here. Play it.
Some of it's relatively straightforward work, where we're making good progress designing body armor that fits women properly, tailoring combat uniforms for women, creating maternity flight suits, updating requirements for their hairstyles. And some of it is going to take an intensity of purpose and mission to really change the culture and habits that cause women to leave the military.
Yeah, I mean, that's the pregnant flight suit comment. I mean, this is the commander-in-chief. This is the president of the United States focused on this.
Allegedly.
I can understand. Yeah, I can understand that if you're dealing with the logistics lower down the chain, maybe some of these things would come up, grooming standards, things like that. But Kurt, this does feel like it's an exaggerated focus right now from the very top down for political reasons.
Well, of course it is, and I'm not surprised. Every other institution in American society has gone woke, and the military, where the senior leadership is in Washington, D.C., it's trained that way. If you go to the Army War College, for instance, you're not going to be taught that our number one strategic threat is China. You're going to be taught that the number one strategic threat is the weather, or maybe extremists in the ranks, or some other nonsense. Look, this all comes back to one important point. Tucker Carlson has won the same number of wars that our present military leadership has in the last 20 years. He, however, has lost fewer wars. And I think that's a very important point. All this nonsense that President Asterisk was babbling about is just that. It is nonsense. It is not important in the giant scheme of things. What is important is whether we can beat China. We can't right now. I think we would lose, and I think we would lose in a dramatic fashion. The United States has been kind of gliding for the last 30 years. I was in the last war we won without any kind of equivocation. That is Desert Storm. 30 years ago, I was there with my heavily armed car wash out in the desert in the aftermath of it. But since then, we've been driving on and on and on. And you saw it in the Sergeant Major's tweet. We're the best, most powerful fighting force in the world. You know, they keep telling us they're so great. Well, I'd like to see them win in Afghanistan, or maybe Iraq, where we just lost another guy because they shelled us. Or maybe finally finish up in Syria, where they just dumped a whole bunch of other guys.
You mentioned their view of Tucker, by the way. I wanted the audience to sort of hear some of what Tucker's been saying that's gotten the attention of senior military brass to this point. We can play Tucker's clip.
So we've got new hairstyles and maternity flight suits. Pregnant women are going to fight our wars. It's a mockery of the U.S. military. While China's military becomes more masculine as it's assembled the world's largest navy, Our military needs to become, as Joe Biden says, more feminine, whatever feminine means anymore, since men and women no longer exist. The bottom line is it's out of control, and the Pentagon's going along with this. Again, this is a mockery of the U.S. military and its core mission, which is winning wars.
You know, when somebody says something about you that's not true, it's really easy to brush it off and laugh at it and ignore it. You and I both know what that's like in conservative media, right? So
we sure do.
If somebody attacked Kurt Schlichter's sense of fashion and style, for example, you'd know to laugh them off. But if somebody says something if somebody says something that is true, you tend to have a much more aggressive reaction. And I got to say, the military response to I know it's not everybody. Military is millions of people in it, but some of the senior brass, and clearly there was enough of an impulse here that it made its way into official Twitter accounts. Is Tucker struck a nerve, and I think that's concerning too.
Oh, he absolutely did. Again, they're very sensitive about. You saw that Sergeant Major's tweet. We're the best. We're the most agile, lethal fighting force. Start proving it. Okay, let's put one in the W column for the first time in 20 years. All right, then maybe we can go on. But the problem with it isn't that you're building up morale; it's that you're lying to yourselves, and they're lying to themselves because they don't want to face the real fact. Tucker's cryon said it. Biden ignores China threat. They're ignoring China's threat because China's hard. It's easy to fight Tucker. In fact, though remarkably, they managed to lose to Tucker. The reaction from the veterans community and the civilian community was absolutely negative to this complete breach of protocol and regulations. I mean, they were just excoriated.
If this had happened 3 months ago or 4 months ago, it would be evidence of Trump's fascism, of course, if Trump's generals or people in the Pentagon had said that, Rachel Maddow or Jake Tapper or somebody should shut his mouth because neither of them have ever served, right? But, Kurt, we got to leave it there for now. China's still going to be there, so we got a lot more to talk about, and hopefully we're going to win that war whenever it comes. Hopefully it never comes. But thanks so much, Kurt. Good
I hope it never does.
Yeah.
Thanks for talking.
The Washington Post issues a massive correction on a hit piece against former President Donald Trump months after the story was published. We got that story and much more on Quick Hits next. We're living in very uncertain times, and being prepared for the unknown is more important than ever. I'm sure you've noticed the world we live in is anything but predictable, okay? The government is passing massive spending bills. The Federal Reserve is printing trillions of dollars in fiat currency, and many experts are predicting inflation could run rampant in the coming months. That could spell disaster for the dollars in your bank account. We could all benefit from something a little more reliable right about now. Well, what could be more reliable than real gold and silver? I'm talking about real gold and silver you can actually hold right in your hands. Call the Oxford Gold Group now and learn how easy it is to get real gold and silver sent securely directly to your home, or how you can have real gold and silver placed in your IRA or 401k. Just call the Oxford Gold Group at 833-600-GOLD and ask for your free guide on owning gold and silver. Again, call the Oxford Gold Group right now at 833-600-GOLD. The Oxford Gold Group is the only gold company I trust. Give them a call right now, 833-600-GOLD. The Washington Post issues a massive correction about Donald Trump, and HBO's Bill Maher takes aim at cancel culture. Those stories coming up in tonight's Quick Hits. Let's start with the Washington Post. Remember that huge story a few months ago about Donald Trump calling the Georgia Secretary of State, I believe his name was Raffensperger, and telling election investigators to, quote, find the fraud? Made a ton of headlines. Democrats were calling it election interference and obstruction. Yeah, turns out that was total BS. The Washington Post has finally issued a correction to the story, writing, correction. 2 months after publication of this story, the Georgia Secretary of State released an audio recording of President Donald Trump's December phone call with the state's top elections investigator. The recording revealed that the Post misquoted Trump's comments on the call based on information provided by a source. Trump did not tell the investigator to find the fraud or say that she would be a national hero if she did. In fact, I've got a fellow also here named David Schaefer, who's a chairman of the Republican Party in Georgia. He wrote that the Secretary of State's office secretly recorded the conversation, mischaracterized its comments to the Washington Post, and then attempted to delete the recording. It was recently discovered in a laptop trash folder as part of an open records search. Georgia Secretary of State, a Republican, by the way, if you ever want to know how much Republicans are willing to go against Trump, lied to a national newspaper to take down the president. There were claims of criminal behavior here, and then destroyed the evidence that would have shown, which we now have, that President Trump did nothing wrong. It was, as he is fond of saying, a perfect phone call. Why did they lie about it then? Well, anything to get Trump, anything they can do to destroy President Donald Trump, they will inherently justify. Whatever it takes, whatever they have to say. And then there's cancel culture, which is horrible and greatly annoying and ruining our country and ruining our free speech and our free thought. And it all comes from the left. The left are the book burners. We all know the book burners or book banners are never, ever, ever on the side of right. And yet you have Bill Maher, who's a man of the left, say what you will about him. He is principled on some things, and this is one of them, saying that this cancel culture nonsense is hurting us not just internally, but externally as well. Play it.
You're not going to win the battle for the 21st century if you are a silly people. And Americans are a silly people. That's the classic phrase from Lawrence of Arabia, when Lawrence tells his Bedouin allies that as long as they stay a bunch of squabbling tribes, they will remain a silly people. Well, we're the silly people now. Do you know who doesn't care that there's a stereotype of a Chinese man in a Dr. Seuss book? China. All 1.4 billion of them could give a crouching tiger flying
He's right. It's true. The left doesn't want to hear it. The left would rather prefer to give themselves big pats on the back for their wokeness. But at the end of the day, all we're doing is tearing each other apart over nonsense instead of moving the country forward. And people should be able to see this and recognize it for what it is. And you know, if you've watched this show or if you've heard me on radio, you know that I am a pretty staunch critic of Dr. Fauci as well as the lockdown regimen that's out there. This idea that if only we wash our hands, 6 feet of social distance, and double mask, remember, not a single mask, even though that's what they told us the first 10 months, double mask during the pandemic, you will be better off. How much better off, they don't really know. Here's the problem. Fauci also recently, as in this past weekend, said maybe 3 feet is enough. Oh, I thought 6 feet was like a super scientific number that they had tested out with real world evidence, and they knew that 6 feet is what you really need. 3 feet is not, because also 3 feet is an arm's length from, so just stay arm's length away from somebody. That feels pretty easy to do, right? But there's a problem. CNN guest who's also a doctor, because all these MDs, they're the science, as we're told, but a lot of them disagree with each other. So who's really the science? Here's a doctor on CNN saying it's actually 3 feet.
The CDC is actually looking at this data about spacing. And is 3 feet in certain situations okay as opposed to the 6 feet? I'm just curious your take on that. And what you think we're going to hear? Because Dr. Fauci said it won't be very long, I promise you, that there will be some guidelines in regards to this data.
Yeah, it's all about mask compliance. That's going to be absolutely critical, because if you don't have masks, remember, this virus aerosolizes. So even 6 feet is not enough. It can go 17, 18 feet, several meters, this virus.
I'm sorry. She was saying about the 3 feet, the journalist. The doctor's saying 6 feet's not enough. So we got some doctors telling us that 3 feet's good. We've been told 6 feet's good for the last year. But another doctor's saying, well, if you don't have a mask on, maybe you could get hit 18 feet away. They're just making it up as they go along. They don't know. These are guesses. How much more obvious does this have to be before everyone sees, yeah, virus, it's in the air. How far does it go? How fast? Who gets it? They don't know. So they make up these rules. And then people think, if I just obey the rules, I'll be safe. But it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Life doesn't work that way. You know what else doesn't work that way? Pandemics and climate change.
When you think about, sadly, having to prepare for this again, right? And I know there's a lot of folks who think that, due to climate change and due to the globalization in general, it's inevitable we're going to deal with more and more viruses like this.
It's been 100 years. We've had a lot of globalization going on for quite some while now, and it's been 100 years since we've had a pandemic that's a true global pandemic like this. So, but climate change is going to cause it? Climate change is now, it's amazing. If you're a liberal, it can cause anything. Oh, my car ran out of gas, must be climate change. Plus, why aren't you driving an electric car? You don't care about the earth. That's it for tonight's Hold the Line. The No Spin News with Bill O'Reilly is up next. Shields high.